Imagine you are 3 days old. You can't speak. You can't walk. You can't regulate your own body temperature. Your skull, the skull of the most cognitively advanced creature on this planet, is so enormous relative to your body that the birth canal could barely fit it through. And here's the part nobody mentions. You are, by every biological measure, catastrophically unfinished. A newborn foal stands within an hour. A chimpanzee infant clings to its mother's fur on day one. You can't even hold your own head up for weeks. You are the most helpless newborn of any primate on Earth. Not a close second, the most helpless. By a significant margin, so how did you survive? Who was keeping you alive? And why does the answer, the real answer, completely rewrite what we think we know about family, about aging, and about what it actually means to be human? Let's start with what you probably think. You probably think the answer is obvious. Mother kept you alive. A mother's love is the most powerful force in nature, right? It is in every song, every story, every culture on Earth. The bond between a mother and her infant is the foundation of the human family. And that is not wrong, exactly. But here is where it gets complicated. Here is where the math stops working. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives, have a birth interval of roughly 5 to 6 years when their infants survive. That means a chimpanzee mother waits about 5 or 6 years between babies, during which time she raises that single infant, essentially alone. No help, no village. Just her, human hunter-gatherers. Around 3 years between births. Now, sit with that for a second. Human infants are dramatically more dependent for dramatically longer than chimpanzee infants. And yet human mothers are having the next baby, while the previous child is still completely incapable of feeding itself, walking any meaningful distance, or surviving without an adult present at every moment. The math, on its own, simply does not work. A single mother, even the most devoted mother who has ever lived, does not have enough hours in a day, enough calories in her body, or enough arms to simultaneously nurse a newborn, forage, enough food for herself and a toddler, carry both children across difficult terrain, and keep everyone alive. This is not a judgment. This is arithmetic. So if the caloric math alone could bankrupt a single mother, who exactly was covering the deficit? Something else was happening. Something, or rather, someone else. There is a group of people who almost never get mentioned when we tell the story of human survival. But without them, you would not be here. I want to hold that thought for just a moment, because before we get to who they are, we need to understand just how expensive you were. The human brain is, metabolically speaking, a disaster. Not in the long run. Obviously, it has worked out fine, but in the short run, in infancy, it is a catastrophically energy-hungry organ. Roughly half, sometimes more, of a newborn's resting metabolic energy goes directly to fueling the brain. Half, while the rest of the body is trying to grow lungs and bones and a digestive system. The brain is sitting there consuming the majority of the available budget, like a startup that has raised too much venture capital and has absolutely no plan to be profitable anytime soon. And the thing is, this doesn't get cheaper quickly. The human brain continues requiring extraordinary metabolic investment through childhood, far longer than any other primate. You're not done being expensive at 1 year old, or 2, or 5, which means whoever is raising a human child is not just responsible for keeping a helpless newborn alive for a few weeks. They're responsible for sustaining this enormous neurological project for years, under conditions where food is not delivered to your door, where you have to walk to find it, where everything trying to eat you is also walking. If you were designing a species from scratch, you would not design this. You would call this a bug, not a feature. And yet, here is the thing. There is a reason this works. There is a mechanism that makes this possible. A mechanism so elegant that when you hear it, you'll think, of course. Of course that is how it works. It couldn't work any other way. But first, one more piece of the puzzle. It turns out the baby itself is not a passive participant in this situation. Look at a human infant's face. Really look at it. Big eyes, round cheeks, tiny, disproportionately large forehead, short limbs, everything slightly too big, slightly too round, slightly too soft. Konrad Lorenz, the ethologist, not a brand of luggage, identified this cluster of features in the 1940s and called it the schema, baby schema. And he proposed that this specific configuration of features acts as what he called an innate releasing mechanism. a biological trigger that, when perceived by an adult human, activates caregiving behavior, not sometimes, reliably, not just in parents, in adults who have never had children of their own. Decades later, neuroscientists put people in fMRI scanners and showed them infant faces. Real infant faces, with the baby schema, features manipulated up or down, and what they found was that the nucleus accumbens lights up. That is the brain's reward center. The same structure involved in attraction, in pleasure, in the anticipation of something good. Baby faces activate the reward system in human adults regardless of whether those adults have children. In other words, looking at a baby feels like a reward. Your brain registers it the same way it registers something valuable, something worth attending to. That smile a baby gives you across a room. It is not for you specifically. It is a recruitment strategy. The infant is, without knowing it, running an ancient program designed to make adults, any adults, not just its parents, want to be involved, want to help, want to come closer, and the crying. Same logic. Infant cries are calibrated, again, not consciously, but by millions of years of selection, to be almost impossible to ignore. A sound specifically tuned to capture adult attention and activate a response. Caregivers and studies describe infant cries as urgent, as demanding of immediate action, as impossible to tune out. The infant is, in the most literal sense of the word, advertising. It is advertising for care, and the market responds. If it takes a village to raise a child, where did the village come from? Now, back to the people who never get mentioned. The answer, when researchers first started piecing it together, came from an unexpected place. Not a hospital, not a laboratory, not a theory about fathers. A grandmother, in the 1980s, an anthropologist named Kristen Hawkes went to Tanzania to study the Hadza, one of the last remaining hunter-gatherer populations on Earth. She went to study something about food. What she found was something else entirely. She noticed that when a Hadza mother was nursing a new infant, her ability to forage dropped significantly. She was spending less time finding food, less time providing for her older children. The older children were, in theory, at nutritional risk, but they weren't. And when Hawkes looked at why, when she traced who was compensating for the mother's reduced output, she found the same answer again and again. Grandmother. The children whose grandmother was present and foraging nearby were measurably better nourished. Their weight tracked, not with their mother's foraging success, but with their grandmother's. The grandmother, who was past her own reproductive years, was effectively subsidizing the entire family's caloric budget during the period when it mattered most. She stopped having children so that more children could live. Read that again. The most efficient thing this woman could do for the survival of her genetic legacy, not her children, but her grandchildren, was to stop reproducing herself and redirect those resources entirely into keeping the next generation alive. This is the grandmother hypothesis. And it doesn't just explain Hadza nutrition data. It potentially explains one of the most puzzling features of human biology: why women live so long past menopause. Every other female great ape reproduces until shortly before death. There is no long post-reproductive period. There is no decade of vital, energetic grandmothering. You reproduce until your body gives out, and then your body gives out. Humans are different. Human women routinely live 30, 40, 50 years past their last birth. 30, 40, 50 years. That is an enormous investment in biological infrastructure. Decades of living, eating, consuming resources, with no direct reproductive return, unless the return is indirect, unless the presence of a post-reproductive female in the group increases the survival of her grandchildren so dramatically that natural selection favored longer lifespans in women, not for their own reproduction, but for their grandchildren's survival. This is what the data suggests. This, if the hypothesis holds, is why your grandmother existed. But here is where it gets more interesting, because the grandmother was not working alone. The technical term for what human societies practice, what they have always practiced, is cooperative breeding. It means offspring are raised not just by their biological parents, but by a network of other individuals, grandparents, aunts, older siblings, unrelated adults, neighbors, friends, and humans. It turns out, are extraordinarily good at this. Research among the Efi foragers of the Democratic Republic of Congo found that by 18 weeks of age, a typical infant had 14 different non-maternal caregivers in a single day. 14. and was transferred between those caregivers roughly 8 times per hour. If that sounds chaotic, it wasn't. It was a system, a deeply human system. The Hadza data tells the same story from a different angle. Hadza children spend roughly a third of their early years in the care of someone who is not their mother. Not occasionally. Consistently, a third of their entire early childhood. The village, and I mean this completely literally, raises the child. Now, here's the part that should make you feel slightly less special. This is not uniquely human. Marmosets figured this out millions of years before we did. Common marmosets, small New World monkeys, are cooperative breeders. The mother nurses the infants, but from almost the first day of life, it is the father and the older siblings and other group members who are doing most of the carrying. Marmoset fathers have been documented losing weight from the energetic cost of infant transport. They are working that hard. The mother, in the meantime, can recover and become pregnant again sooner. Exactly the same logic as human alloparenting. Among mammals overall, cooperative breeding of this kind is present in roughly 3% of species. Among primates, it is rare. But among the great apes, only humans do this at scale. We didn't invent cooperation. We just turned it into civilization. So let's talk about what this means, because this isn't just an interesting evolutionary footnote. This changes the story we tell about ourselves. We live, most of us in the industrialized world, in nuclear families. 2 parents, children, 1 residence, largely isolated from extended networks of care. This structure feels natural to us. It feels like the baseline. It feels like what families are supposed to look like. It is not. The nuclear family, as a primary child, rearing unit, is a remarkably recent and remarkably unusual arrangement. 200,000 years of human history. And for most of that time, the overwhelming majority of that time, children were not raised by 2 people in a house. They were raised by everyone, multiple adults, multiple caregivers, overlapping generations, all participating in the ongoing project of keeping the youngest members of the group alive. And then, in the last several generations, we made a decision. We decided 2 people could do what it previously took a village to do. And if this is the system we evolved inside, what exactly are we doing when we try to run it with 2 people? The results are in. Parental burnout is not a personality flaw. Maternal isolation is not ingratitude. Postpartum mental health crises are not weakness. These are predictable outcomes when you ask a system to run a program it was never designed to run alone. The nuclear family is not the natural family. It is an experiment, and the data is not looking good. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer, HRD, spent decades making this argument. She pointed out that there was simply no biological way that a species with our life history could have evolved unless our ancestors had been cooperative breeders. The long dependency periods, the shortened birth intervals, the post-menopausal lifespan, none of it makes sense without alloparenting. None of it adds up without a grandmother nearby, without an aunt who shows up, without a community that treats other people's children as worthy of its attention. We are not built to do this alone. We were never built to do this alone. Every system we have, the baby's face that makes you want to look, the cry that won't let you look away, the grandmother's drive to keep foraging long past any direct benefit to herself. Every piece of this is part of the same architecture, a distributed system built over millions of years, for one purpose: keeping fragile, expensive, cognitively extraordinary children alive long enough to become adults. Long enough to do this again. The next time you watch someone hold a baby that isn't theirs, a stranger on a train, an elderly neighbor, a friend with no children of their own, watch what happens to their face. Watch the shift. Something arrives. Something that was not there before. It has a name in neuroscience. It has a name in evolutionary biology. It has been present in our species since long before we had names for anything. It is the oldest contract we have. You take care of the children. All the children, not just yours. Because there is no such thing as just yours. Not really. Not in the system we evolved inside of. There are only children, and there are adults. And for 200,000 years, the adults have been picking up the children. Every person who has ever held a baby that wasn't theirs has been running the same program. That program kept our species alive. That program is you.